an original MCM production.
My name is Ptosha Davis, and I am your guest host today for the MATA Community Media Special Election Project. I am so pleased to have as our guest today County Executive Chris Abele. How are you, Chris?
I'm good. Great to be here, Ptosha.
We are so excited to have you. What I wanted to have an opportunity to talk to you about was exactly what it is that you do as a county executive, and also some of the things or successes that you've had since you've been in office.
Sure. The county, like counties nationally, we run mostly social programs. So as opposed to cities that do a lot more economic development, we have aging and family care, and we deal with a lot more people, a lot more direct interaction, and a lot of the most vulnerable. We also obviously run the transit system, the airport, parks, the district attorneys, criminal justice system, sort of the back part of the criminal justice system. It's 41 different business lines, and it's pretty complicated. The biggest issue we have is the biggest source of our revenue is the state, and we don't have lots of control over that. But one of the things we've done, and I feel pretty good about in the last 5 years, is we've paid down a lot of debt, and I'll tell you why that's crucially important. All the services we provide for thousands of people, the single largest reason in the past that they'd get cut is because we had this bigger and bigger credit card bill. Essentially, every month and every year, the amount of money, your money, that was going towards debt and interest and not towards services was getting bigger. So one of the things I wanted to do is start lowering that debt. The other thing I wanted to do is start restoring services, and there was a few key promises I made. One, I wanted to reform the behavioral health division. We'd had study after study telling us in the county that the way we used to operate the behavioral health division, these essentially warehousing people who'd been in facilities and hadn't been out of the building for, in some cases, over 20 years. Nobody else in the country did that.
When you say behavioral health, you're referring to what most people would say the mental health complex?
Yes, the mental health complex, exactly. So we had these reports, but for whatever reason, for decades, we hadn't been able to change that. First, we have lowered debt. We've lowered the debt by hundreds of millions, which means that each year we've got more to put back in services. Second, we did reform the behavioral health division and the mental health complex. We no longer warehouse people. We're serving more people now, giving them better care in the community. It's individualized care, it's least restrictive, recovery-oriented. We're doing a lot better by the people we serve. We used to have deficits there every year. Now we have surpluses. The other thing I had said is that we were going to stop raising bus fares, because for years bus fares were going up every year and routes were getting cut. And I'm proud of the fact that for 5 years in a row we have never raised bus fares, we've never cut routes, and we will keep that up because people depend on transit to get to school, to get to work. I also said I wanted to do more for economic development, and 5 years ago we didn't even have an economic development department. Now we do, and we have been involved in projects that have led to committed projects, hundreds of millions of dollars in investment, thousands of jobs, and we've done this all without ever proposing a tax increase. I always tell people I don't think that Republicans or Democrats or any set of people like higher taxes. There's a bunch more beyond that, but in general, we've made a lot of progress where no progress was being made before, and that's something I'm pretty excited about.
So as a segment of the community and a segment of community government, the county government, what are some of the things you just said? Basically, we offer services. The county, you control where services are offered, but it looks like you've done a lot of fiscal management since coming into office. So there's a couple things that I want us to be able to talk about while you're here today, some of your successes, but I also want to touch on some of the touchy subjects,
Sure, yeah.
like MPS,
Sure.
and what it is the county's involvement is with that, because I think people aren't always clear
Sure.
on what it is that you do and what you don't do and what you have the ability to have control over. So first, I know that you've had a very successful fatherhood program as it relates to child support. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So 5 years ago, the child support department of the county, every year we collect about $100 million, and that's not tax dollars, that's child support that goes to single parents, generally moms, who are bringing up kids. So obviously that's crucially important, because every time you add another person to that list who are getting a check every month, those kids are more likely to stay in school, more likely to graduate, more likely to get a job, less likely to have a brush with the law. That part is what we're mandated to do. What we decided, though, 4 years ago is we wanted to do more, and we wanted to do something for fathers, because the mentality before was, hey, just hold them accountable and make sure they pay their child support. But what we've started doing, we started about 4 years ago, is we provided job training, job placement, license recovery, and peer counseling for thousands of dads every year. And the idea is, hey, when you help somebody get a job, they're better able to pay child support. When they work with a peer counselor on how to re-engage with their kids, a lot of times people have this notion that there are these dads who just have no interest in being with their kids. All dads want to be good fathers. A lot of times they just haven't had a good model. And what's so powerful about this program is we're connecting these fathers not just with some well-meaning social worker, but somebody who used to be in their position, who can say, hey, I know what it's like to be estranged from my kids, but I connected. Let me help you. And I think that's a big part of why it's had a lot of success. And you know, when we're getting people back on their feet, reconnected with kids, in a job, help them get their license back, we're moving the ball forward. And again, this hasn't been just dozens or hundreds, this is thousands of fathers a year.
That's awesome. Thank you for that information. One of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about is also, I know that there's been a mission to actually eradicate homelessness, not just reduce it. And that is something that definitely here in Milwaukee is an issue. Can you share a little bit about what the county has done with that program?
Sure. This is something that's just been really exciting. I think most viewers probably know Milwaukee, like most urban areas, does have a significant issue with homelessness. Chronic homelessness, specifically, that's a definition the federal government uses, but that means people who are homeless for over a year, or homeless 3 times in 4 years. And at any given time, you know, if we went out right now and made a count of everybody who's homeless, the people who are chronically homeless are a relatively small percentage. But if you count up how many people are in debt in shelter beds per day over the year, this group accounts for a huge percentage, because they're the ones who just stay homeless. Other people are getting out. So we started looking at increasing our capacity for housing. We were looking at this model that the federal government uses, that HUD uses, called Housing First. And the idea is you don't just provide somebody with a shelter bed, you provide them with permanent housing. So there's no question of, hey, how long do I have it? As long as you want to stay. On their own terms. The other part of it is we do provide all sorts of wraparound services, but they don't have to accept the services on the condition
for receiving.
Right. And the reason this program has worked so well is that people are taking all of these services on their own terms. And statistically, it isn't just about they retain dignity. Statistically, they are much more likely to stay in housing, stay in programming, and what's really incredible is 5 years in, a significant percentage of people who start in this program are in housing that they're paying for, and they don't need our help, they're empowered. And so we looked at the population here in the county, we looked at the resources we had, and we thought, well, You know, a lot of times in Milwaukee, we look at projects and say, well, this is just too big to make much more of a dent, more than a dent in. But we thought, well, what would have to happen, not just to lower it by 20% or lower it by 50%, what would have to happen to be able to essentially say, we've got a functional zero for chronic homelessness? And we worked really hard, and we brought in a lot of partners. The federal government, Secretary Antonio Riley has been great, Salvation Army, foundations. And we decided we're going to end chronic homelessness in 3 years with permanent housing. And what's really amazing is we made that announcement last July on a hot day, and we are actually significantly ahead of schedule. We're doing the right thing for people, in some cases who'd been homeless for 20 years.
Wow.
And now they've got their own place. And all of a sudden, the way they think about their world and their choices is completely different.
Right.
The shelter houses are seeing freed up shelter beds because the people who are chronically homeless and were there a lot are not, which means they've got more capacity, and it's been hugely significant. But and for anybody who says, well, is this too much to pay? Does it cost a lot? The interesting thing is it actually, at the end of the day, saves money, because this group has a lot of issues with mental illness. They are a lot less emergency room visits, and so they're lower cost, better health care, more likely to be able to get jobs, and a lot of them do, far fewer interactions with fire departments and police, which is an issue that had been happening. But I guess, to me, the big picture is this. There are so many issues we have in Milwaukee that look like they're just too big to take on. And here, I know this isn't the only issue. There's a lot of issues, but here we've got one where we said we're not just going to make a dent in it. We're not just going to sort of nick around the edges of a problem. We're going to say, stake in the ground, we're going to end this problem. And if we can do that, then we have to look at some of the other issues like violent crime, like the disparities in employment and education, and say, hey, how many of these things, maybe we can make a bigger dent than we thought. Yeah.
So I have a background question a little bit. There are several municipalities that comprise Milwaukee County, so it's not just the city of Milwaukee. How many municipalities are part of Milwaukee
There's
County?
19. The city of Milwaukee is the largest. It's about 600,000, a little over, and then the other 19 make up the about 1 million people who live in Milwaukee County.
Okay, I think that's some good information for people who aren't aware. So let's dig into some of the tough questions. MPS, what is the county's role in the current state of MPS, and what is currently being done that the county is assisting with?
So about a year ago, state legislation passed that created this office of a commissioner, and it said that the county executive would appoint this commissioner, and that the role would be to look at some of the poorest performing MPS schools and try and improve them. Critics have called it takeover legislation. Interestingly, the legislation nowhere mentions takeover. When I first heard about this, before I ever ran for county executive, I've spent and continue to spend a lot of time on nonprofit boards and working with a foundation. And one of the issues I've worked with for a long time is education, and particularly MPS. And I told the two authors of it, look, I'm not going to do anything to hurt MPS. I'm not going to be another, the latest proxy in the fight between, all the different approaches and systems that schools have. I get along great with Dr. Driver. I think she's a fantastic superintendent. I said I'm going to work with her, be totally transparent, not do anything to hurt. And I'm going to appoint somebody who's not, a voucher person. I'm going to appoint somebody who gets MPS. So I appointed Damon Means, who went to MPS, whose wife is a principal at MPS.
And he's a huge MPS advocate and supporter.
He is, and part of why I appointed him is he agreed with my approach, which is we're not going to do anything that's going to hurt MPS, but if there's things we can do to help by bringing services like wraparound services that counties can, but MPS wouldn't otherwise have access to, well, that's something, of course, we should do. So we've spent a long time and regularly meeting with Dr. Driver, along with countless groups in the community, parents groups, teachers, MTEA, just talking about here's how we're approaching it, here's what we're thinking, what do you think? But one of the things I'm excited about is we are going to be able to bring more services to MPS at no cost to MPS than they have now. And, is this going to turn everything around? No. MPS is a huge district. Yeah. What we need to do, the most important thing I think we can do is have the state fund education the way it should. The last state budget cut a ton of funding for K through 12. It also cut a ton of funding from the UW system. And while neither of these are directly under county, I live here, and all of us are better for a stronger and robustly resourced education system. And, as soon as we say, well, that's not my responsibility, we're kind of missing the point. We're all working for the same people. We just are more effective when we work together. And I'll continue through this new law to advocate for more funding for MPS, restore K through 12 funding. I'd love to see the funding flaw fixed now, not 10 years from now. Right. But in the meantime, this is the law, so I'm going to implement it in a way that helps MPS, working with MPS.
So basically to build their capacity and strengthen their infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so another question. Wanted to find out, what is the county's role, or what impact will the new Bucks Arena have on the county?
Sure. Well, one of the impacts you're seeing already, in the last couple of months, there's been a few announcements of new projects, construction projects, literally in the Park East. One's a little over $50 million retail and office project. There's another one that was just announced a couple of days ago along the river where the Lackey and Joy's building are. I can tell you, since a lot of that land is county land, the amount of interest we've gotten from developers, and as you're seeing, not just interest, people are bidding against each other. Right. And this is real money, and it's going to be real jobs, and to me, there's a number of benefits. One, we had this big empty area sitting here for over a decade. Everybody knows where the Park East is, mostly because it's hard to miss. You come in and here's this big open area in the middle of the city. And it wasn't earning any property tax revenue, which is what we use for services. It wasn't providing any jobs. And all of a sudden, we've got a scale of development that we've just never had. The volume is huge. And one of the things I'm excited about is the ownership has been very engaged with the community. If there are meetings they're not taking, I haven't heard of them. They meet with everybody. They're already not just supporting nonprofits, they're getting on boards. They're interested in job creation. This is not a group that's sort of flying through and they just want to know they own a basketball team somewhere. Right. They're invested in the community. And now all that said, the continuing county role wasn't just, and this is true for the city too, it wasn't just, hey, help get a deal done. What's important for all of us is we keep our eyes on it and we make sure that, all right, we've made this big public investment, city, state, county. I want to make sure that we get every ounce of value out of that. We create every job we can. As many of those jobs are local jobs. We generate as much revenue out of that, and that's not a one-time thing. That's an all the time.
Not a one and done. So I have another question. Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County boast some of the highest negative demographics for people of color, most especially Black people. So I want to talk a little bit about the House of Corrections and some of the things that are being done in partnership with the city and other organizations to improve and reduce some of those negative demographics.
So most of the viewers here will know that the county's recently voted to create an Office of African American Affairs. The reason I'm excited about this is sometimes in order for Milwaukee to kind of get into gear on addressing any issue, we need a very visible, very public and resourced entity that can focus energy and not let things drift off. And so the way we're looking at this office is I want this office, at least at the county, to have input on every department we have, on every service we provide. So when I talk about, when you mention what are the issues for African Americans, usually the statistics people bring up, and rightly, unemployment, the disparities in unemployment, the disparities in graduation rates, I mean, I think almost the most morally outrageous one. We have the highest incarceration rate in the country. Of African Americans. We're almost double the national average. So for the jobs part, we've created programs like Uplift Milwaukee, which aren't just job training and job placement. They are specific to 53206. They're specific to,
the worst
eligible
zip code in the country.
Right. What we've been doing is looking at all our departments and say, all right, what are the resources we have? How are we allocating them now? And how could we change that and focus on the area that needs it the most? So with housing, if we know we've got X many dollars and X many units we can expand on, all right, well, let's focus in the area that needs it the most. And let's have our job training focus in the same area. And with the fatherhood program, we're going to coordinate and make sure let's leverage the hell out of it. Same thing, even parks. People say, well, what would parks have to do with it? Every year we decide which parks are we going to invest in to sort of redo, and we like to involve the community in it. And if I know that, all right, here's the zip code, we're focusing all these other efforts, let's do more of what we did at Moody Park and say, hey, community, why don't you come and you tell us, what do you want to see here? Which nonprofits, which partnerships? You invest in a new park, all of a sudden property values go up right around the park. People are a little more likely to invest, a little more likely to move. All this stuff adds up. But one of the things we just haven't done as a community is just focus it all, kind of map out, all right, what are all the tools we have? And at the House of Correction, because I'm looking at the incarceration rate and think, all right, well, what can the county do about that? First, we've invested in community prosecutors, alternative sentencing agreements, and partnerships that allow people not to get a record in the first place.
So they don't become
I mean, everything we can do to keep people from even getting in. But if people are, say at the House of Correction, it's about 10,000 people a year. What used to happen was we had no programming at all. We took it over.
Warehousing.
Yeah, essentially warehousing, yeah. And that's when the House of Correction was run by the sheriff. A little over 2 years ago, we took over the management of it. So now we have about 20 job certification programs. We've given hundreds of GEDs. We help people write resumes, do job interview training. We automatically enroll them in the Affordable Care Act or Badger Care when they process out. I think we're one of the only houses in the country to do that. We just were one of 10 in the country that just got a National Department of Labor grant to build a job training facility in the House of Correction.
So for clarification, these are all services that inmates receive before they leave the House of Correction.
Correct.
So it's not connecting them afterwards, but it's actually giving them and providing the services for them while they're still.
While they're there, yeah. What we're trying to do at the House is give people absolutely every tool we can so they've got the best shot of getting on their feet, getting a job. 2 years ago, people would come out of the House and, sometimes they would be dropped off on a bus on Wisconsin Avenue in the middle of the night.
Right.
Now they come out and you got a GED, a resume, insurance, a bank account, and often for the first time, and you know how to think about an interview. Plus, we're trying to connect that with all the other services we're adding in the community, because I want to make sure, hey, what else can we do to connect people to jobs? I think there's a lot to do, but one thing, I've said this before and I'm going to keep saying this, I think the only way we move the needle on all these statistics is we as a community, and I will say this as many times as I can, put a stake in the ground and say, we're not just going to have an impact, we're going to make a measurable impact, and I want to be held accountable for it. People should hold me accountable, hold all of us accountable. Because until we make that commitment publicly and we stick with it, it's going to be another one of these things where we have some conferences and there's an op-ed or two and gosh, this is a big problem, and then nothing happens. This needs to be more than that. And a big element for us is thinking about, so how do we staff the Office of African American Affairs? And I've been meeting with countless people on that. We get a lot of input, not surprisingly, a lot of very differing opinions too. But I want to get this right. And one of the things people have heard is they don't want the same old faces. They want people who know the community. They want people who are going to listen, not just show up and give everybody a lecture about what they need to do. Show up and genuinely listen, and not just once, to keep doing that. I know one of the functions we want is a grant writer. I've been pushing for grant writers in the county for a while. I think we have still a lot of opportunity to get more federal funding because we didn't used to apply for it more than 5 years ago. Now we do. This will allow us to be more aggressive, but we need to partner with the city. We need to partner with the academic community, with the business community. I mean, there's a lot of pieces here, but this is the highest priority for me. It has to be. And I guess the final thing I'd say is when we're planning, when we sit down with an office for the first time and say, all right, we've got all this information, all these resources, what goal should we be shooting for? Mm-hmm. We can't stop at simply saying, hey, on this incarceration rate, let's get out of the top 5. Okay. We need to set a goal of saying, what needs to happen to have the lowest incarceration rate in the country? I mean, what needs to happen for people to live in Atlanta and think, you know what, Atlanta's all right, but someday I want to be in Milwaukee. I'd love to be the most friendly, African-American friendly community, and nobody can tell me that's not possible. Anything is possible. We just need to commit to it.
So, Chris, I want to talk a little bit about something that I know is not your favorite subject. I want to talk about Chris Abele. I want to talk about some of the things that you've done and continue to do here in our community as far as it relates to education, philanthropy, those type of things. Can you just share just a little bit?
Sure. I have worked with an awful lot of nonprofits around town. At one point or another, I probably at least know the directors of about all of them. Most of the work and volunteering and support I've done and continue to do is arts, education, some environmental, and then nationally human rights. And some organizations I've worked with. I've been on the board of the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Milwaukee for just about 16 years. I chaired it for 3. And one campaign I co-chaired, we raised about $59 million, and that's for scholarships for kids who need it the most. And so people know the clubs has 43,000 members, and these are, it won't surprise you, socioeconomically they're like way below average, but we know that MPS kids who are also club kids are statistically a little more likely to graduate. I mean, their grades are a bit better, truancy is lower. And we partner with everybody, and that's a cause that's been very dear to my heart, and frankly, some of the best friendships I have. When you're in an organization for 16 years, you watch kids grow up. Right. And I've seen some pretty amazing stories.
And for those students who graduate from MPS and want to go to college, you've also done some work in that area too.
I have, yes. Recently, I am an honorary co-chair of MATC's Promise Initiative. The idea is to create an endowment so that kids can go to MATC for 2 years with no tuition or fees. I mean, have all of that covered. Initially, we looked at a goal of 1,000 kids because we're just sort of getting started on this. We're past that. We're now close to 3,000 kids. The challenge will be to make sure that kids know that this program is out there. Right. But we need to be doing everything we can in this community if we want to change the realities we're talking about, to take down barriers, to provide more resources. And the nice thing about this kind of scholarship is if somebody in their freshman year in high school mm-hmm. isn't thinking, gosh, I don't know how I'm going to be able to pay for college, right. They're not thinking in as engaged a way in the next 4 years. But if they know, hey, if I get through 4 years, I'm covered. Tuition right. free and fees free. You're looking at that next 4 years in a different way. Right. And we're excited because I think we're going to be able to keep pushing that number up. But that's staying on boards and volunteerism is something, I still do. I did long before I was office. I'll do after. I mean, it's also very satisfying work. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak with you. The election is coming up, correct?
Mm-hmm. It is.
April 5th?
Yes.
And if people just had one thing you wanted to tell them why they should vote for you, what would it be? One thing.
One thing. The reason I'm in office, the one thing I'd say is I'm not focused on looking for fights or winning points for my team. I'm not focused on setting myself up for some future office. I ran because I love where I live and I care about government and I want to get it right. And I like to think that in 5 years, I've done what I said I was going to do. When I say hold me accountable, I don't mean hold me accountable for just what I say. hold me accountable for what I get done. I said I'd lower debt, I have. I said I'd restore services, I have. And on top of that, we're ending chronic homelessness faster than any place in the United States. We just won the White House challenge for the biggest increase in the covered population for health care. We're doing things we were never doing before. And I've got the best team I've ever had. We're better resourced than we ever have been. We know what we're doing. And again, I'm not running for some other goal. I'm running for Milwaukee.
Well, thank you. And it was a pleasure to speak to you again. And the election is on April 5th. Make sure you get out and vote.
An MCM production.